Hey everybody, welcome to the video with my final thoughts for week 2 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. This is a more finalized and polished version of the first look video that we did earlier in the week. Then I have a lineup building and core plays video scheduled to go tomorrow if you want to check those out. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll be here all season long talking picks, strategy, lineups, amongst other things. So if you think that sounds cool and you want to hang out for the rest of the year, might as well hit that subscribe button so you get notified whenever I post new content. Got one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. If you want access to my entire spreadsheets, which has projections, optimizer, ownership projections, Discord community, a bunch of other stuff, link is down below for that. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contest, or salary cap restrictions or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you sign the over on PrizePicks, you get a free money bonus. It's an instant deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. As always, we'll start with the quarterback position. Up top, we have Russell Wilson at $7,500, and I think a lot of people are going to be playing Chris Carson on this slate. So I'm not sure they're going to double up with the passing game for the Seahawks, but they're in an exceptional spot. We just saw Kyler Murray nearly drop 300 yards and 4 touchdowns versus them. Russell Wilson, he has one of the best wide receiver duos in the entire league with DK Metcalf, who is just a freak of nature. And then you have a shifty wide receiver in Tyler Lockett, who can definitely make some big plays like we saw last week with that really long touchdown versus the Indianapolis Colts. This is definitely a good game to target, especially in tournaments. We have a 54-point over-under, a 30-point implied team total here for the Seahawks, and it is a 6-point spread in their favor. They are playing at home, which I think does bode well for the running game. I'm definitely a big fan of Chris Carson in cash games this week, but this passing attack is in an amazing spot here versus Tennessee. Last year, they were 28th versus quarterbacks, 30th DVA versus the pass, allowed over 23 DraftKings points per game and close to 300 passing yards. And like I just said, Kyler Murray shredded these guys last week on the road. I think they're going to have a tough time here back in Seattle, so I think Wilson is a really good play in tournaments. I think you can get similar upside with guys that are cheaper, so I'm not going to call them a cash game play, but in GPPs, I love loading up on this passing attack. Coming down to our cash game options, I think it's just pick between these three. Now, personally, I like Dak Prescott or Justin Herbert a little bit better in cash games just because I like this game more because it should be closer. Back and forth. I do think there is some risk with Tom Brady just due to the fact that they're 12.5-point favorites at home. This game could easily get out of hand. We saw how bad Atlanta looked last week versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Now they're playing one of, if not the best team in football in Tampa Bay. But nonetheless, Tom Brady is a very good option here below $7,000. He was great last week versus the Cowboys, although most quarterbacks do look great versus the Cowboys because their defense is atrocious. Well over 300 yards, handful of touchdowns. He is the best wide receiver trio in the entire league, and Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin. Good luck guarding all of those guys. You have Rob Gronkowski, who actually looked pretty solid last week as well. Like, Atlanta is not going to be able to stop this offense. It's just a matter of them, if they're going to blow them out or not. Because if we're up like 20, 30 points by the time halftime rolls around, we might be in trouble with our Tom Brady play. Other side, though, if they're blowing them out, there's probably a good chance that Tom Brady's the reason for that. Maybe he already hit value at that point. So it could go either way. But this is a fantastic spot versus Atlanta. It features a 52-point over-under. They have a team total of 32.25, which is currently the highest in the entire slate. And they're also 12.5-point favorites, which is the thing I don't love here. I think it's fine when you consider his price tag at only $6,900. I personally feel like it should be a bit more expensive. I mean, nearly 400 passing yards last week, 4 touchdowns. And last season, they allowed the most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position with over 26 points, and they were 19th DVA versus the pass. And Jalen Hurts last week just absolutely tore them up. And if Jalen Hurts can do that, I think the best quarterback of all time, Tom Brady, with his elite weapons that he has, can certainly do the same. After that, we have Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert. Both are in the same game here, but this is my favorite game on the entire slate. I would expect very high ownership from pretty much every position in this game. I think Dak Prescott's going to be chalky. So will Justin Herbert, and all their wide receivers will. Keenan Allen's going to be very chalky. Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Cedric Wilson with Michael Gallup being out. The tight ends, maybe not so much. I could see Jared Cook. He was involved last week. I want to say around 7 or 8 targets. Hint, you'll see him in a little bit. Zeke Elliott and Austin Eckler should have some ownership as well. So expect a lot of ownership. We have a 54.5-point over-under here. Only a 3.5-point spread. Cowboys have a terrible defense. The Chargers, I wouldn't say they have an elite defense. And I mean, I'm expecting fireworks in this game, and I'm definitely looking forward to watching this one. This game actually does start at 4:25, so it's one of the late games. And they're doing very well early on. Just be careful because there's going to be a ton of ownership in some of these late games. Actually, all these quarterbacks we're talking about right now, 4 o'clock start time. There's going to be a lot of late evening hammers on this slate, but you can go around with either Dak or Justin Herbert. I would say it depends on which wide receivers you're using. If you're using a double Cowboys wide receiver stack, I would use Dak Prescott. If you're using Keenan Allen, use Justin Herbert, although you can mix the two together. They both correlate fine because you're still using the passing attack and then one of the run back options. I would say just Pick whoever you prefer. Dak Prescott might be the better way to go in cash games just because I'm expecting Dallas to be trailing in this game. And we could very well see them air the ball out 50 times. But Justin Herbert, a really good spot versus Dallas's defense, who just absolutely shredded last week versus Tom Brady. He's got Keenan Allen to get the ball to, Austin Eckler, Jared Cook, even Mike Williams. Actually, there's really not much separating the two. My projections are very, very similar to them, and they're not that far off in price. So I would say just go with your gut and pick whichever one is your favorite. On to the running back position, you obviously can't go wrong with guys like Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, but personally on this slate, I feel like we can save a little bit of money and get similar upside. We'll start with Alvin Kamara, $8,800. He's more of a tournament option for me just because the mid-range is absolutely loaded at running back this week. Like guys like Chris Carson, Zeke Elliott, Najee Harris are not too far off in projection from the top-end guys, so why not save some money and spend up a little bit at quarterback or wide receiver on this slate? At least that's what my opinion is. So Alvin Kamara, I can't imagine he'll be too chalky, and Carolina was not a good team versus running backs last year. I know Kamara didn't absolutely smash last week, but he was doing well early on. But as you all know, the Saints absolutely destroyed the Packers. His services were not needed near the end of that game. We saw Tony Jones getting some extra runs, so I would not expect that to happen here versus Carolina. I think this game should be more back and forth, a 3.5-point spread here, which, funny enough, I think it was a 3.5-point spread for the Packers. We obviously saw what happened, but Carolina's not a good run defense. They were bottom half in the league last year. Kamara, one of the just overall best backs in the NFL. Lead pass catcher and gets plenty of volume on the ground. 20 rushing attempts last week on 4.2 yards per carry. He also had 4 targets, 3 catches with a 20% target share. Keep in mind, though, this game was out of hand, so they didn't really have to throw the ball too much to Alvin Kamara out of the backfield. But assuming this game is closer, I assume he's going to get more than a handful of targets here, which makes him an elite play each and every single week. Starting this is a PPR site over on DraftKings. Then dropping on Nick Chubb, $7,800. He's never usually a guy I target in cash games just because he does not catch the football whatsoever. Yes, he'll get a target or two here and there, but Hunt is the main pass catching back in this backfield. But Nick Chubb should be able to destroy the Texans on the ground here, and this game script bodes very well for Nick Chubb. I was hesitant to use him last week. He still put up a good game, 83 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. He has the best offensive line in the league. But now they are 12.5-point favorites at home versus the Texans, a 30.25 implied team total. And last season versus the run, the Texans were dead last, giving up the most points per game to the running back position. 29th DVA versus the run, 145 rushing yards allowed per game, and well over a rushing touchdown. So Nick Chubb should be able to absolutely eat them up. I'd honestly say there's like close to 200 rushing yard upside with 2 to 3 touchdowns. I love Nick Chubb. I think you can play him in cash games or tournaments this week. Just depends on your roster construction. I'm dropping down to Austin Eckler here, $7,300. He actually did not see a target last week, which is going to be, I would say, probably a blip on the radar this season. You're going to see him used heavily in the passing game throughout the entire year. And this is a really good spot versus Dallas. The one bright spot, though, last week was he was actually used around the goal line. He had a rushing touchdown, 15 rushing attempts. I think it's a very good matchup versus Dallas as a 3.5-point favorite at home with a 29-point implied team total. So Eckler at $7,300 seems vastly underpriced for me. I think both him and Chubb should be a lot more expensive than they are. So I think you're actually getting very good value. And like I'm saying, this running back group is absolutely loaded in the mid-range this week. You have Chubb, Eckler, Harris, Zeke, Chris Carson. Like, you really can't go wrong with any of these guys as they're all in very good spots. And dropping down to more than likely the highest owned player on the entire slate, Najee Harris at $6,300. He was off on his debut. A lot of that can be credited to the offensive line, but he just could not really get anything going. But now he gets a really good spot versus Las Vegas. Tyson Williams just had a pretty good game versus them, and so did Latavius Murray. He got into the end zone. Lamar Jackson did some damage on the ground. But Harris was on the field for 100% of the snaps last week. All 55 offensive plays for the Steelers. And at $6,300, great talent running back from Alabama, a first-round pick. I will take that all day at $6,300. He should be close to Austin Eckler in price, and the fact that he is $1,000 cheaper just screams the best value play at running back on the entire slate. The Steelers have a 27-point implied team total here, and they're 6.5-point favorites at home. I think he's one of the absolute best plays on the slate. If you're playing cash games, you need to be playing Najee Harris on the slate. If he busts whatever, but he's going to be very chalky, and all the numbers point to him being a very strong play at that price point. And dating back to last season, the Raiders were 28th DVA versus the run and 29th versus running backs, allowing the 4th most points per game to the position. Looking for the pivot off of the extremely chalky Najee Harris, you have Ezekiel Elliott, $6,200. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not a big Zeke guy. I just have him on here just purely because he's going to be much lower owned than Najee Harris. He's on a good offense. Pollard was involved last week. Zeke Elliott ran a lot of routes last week. He's still going to be involved in the passing game, which bodes well for his floor. And only $6,200 seems a bit too cheap in what should be a very high-scoring game. I know everyone loves the passing attack for Dallas, but who's to say they're not going to move the ball well, but then they get around the 5-yard line, then Zeke just runs in a bunch of touchdowns. I think that is certainly possible. So in tournaments, I think Zeke's fine. He's going to get the volume. He's still the RB1 in this offense. It's just I'm not a big fan of the guy, but I don't think we can ignore the spot that he's in at $6,200. Plus the Chargers last year weren't that great versus the run either. Chris Carson at $6,100. I personally think a lot of people are going to go the Najee Harris and Chris Carson route because it's only around $12,000 combined, and they're both going to get a lot of volume Rashad Penny is going to be out for the Seattle Seahawks here, which means Chris Carson is mainly just going to be the guy in this backfield, and at $6,100, it's a great spot versus Tennessee. He's a 6-point favorite at home. They have a 30-point implied team total with a 54-point over-under. On nearly 20 total touches last week. 16 rushing attempts, close to 100 rushing yards, had 3 targets for 26 yards on 5.7 yards a carry. I think at $6,100, he is definitely a steal. If you're looking for a dirt cheap option in tournaments, we have Chase Edmonds at $4,900. And I have not really talked about this Arizona-Minnesota game. I definitely think it's a good one to target. It's just Kyler Murray is pretty expensive. So is DeAndre Hopkins. So are some of the Minnesota guys. So it's really just a pricing thing. But Edmonds is very cheap here. Minnesota was not good versus the run whatsoever last year. 30th DVOA, 27 versus running backs. Edmonds was pretty efficient last week. 5.3 yards a carry, 12 attempts, 63 yards. It was above the passing game, which we all knew heading into the season. That's why he has a decent floor here, below $5,000. 4 targets, 4 catches, 43 receiving yards. And for some cheap exposure to this game, I think a lot of people, if they are playing this game, will try to get the passing attack, which I totally get. You have Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk, even Rondale Moore, Kyler Murray, so I get it. I do like the Chase Edmonds play in tournaments this week. Moving on to the wide receiver position, I usually say it's as simple as this. Whoever your quarterback is, pair the corresponding wide receivers on that team, and then run it back with the opposing team's best wide receiver, or just a wide receiver option. That's pretty much what it's going to be here. If you're using Russell Wilson, use guys like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Herbert, use Keenan Allen, run it back with one of these Cowboys wide receivers, either CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, or Cedric Wilson. If you're using Matthew Stafford, use Cooper Kupp. I think you guys keep the idea. A.J. Brown's a good run back option with the Seattle wide receivers. I don't want to go too in depth here, but a lot of these guys are in very good spots. Obviously, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett getting the Tennessee secondary, who allowed the second most points per game to wide receivers last season. Russell Wilson, one of the best quarterbacks in football, should have no problem getting the ball versus this bad secondary. And I'm hoping this wide receiver group goes a little bit lower owned than it should, just due to the fact that a lot of people are going to be playing Chris Carson on the slate. Calvin Ridley, if you're looking for an extreme tournament option, if you're stacking Tom Brady, one of his wide receivers, and either Chris Godwin or Antonio Brown, don't be scared to run it back with a guy like Calvin Ridley. I know Atlanta was terrible last week versus the Philadelphia Eagles, but Tampa Bay really struggled versus the Cowboys wide receivers. And even last season, that was their one struggle spot, was guarding wide receivers. So Calvin Ridley, one of the best wide receivers in football. The 12.5-point dog here should see plenty of volume as long as the Falcons stop running the ball on third down, which they did last week. And then I pretty much said everything I wanted to say about the Cowboys. I think you guys get the idea on the Cowboys wide receivers, so I'll skip over the big names there. Allen Robinson at $6,200. This is mainly a price play for me. He just feels a bit too cheap in this matchup versus Cincinnati. He saw 10 targets last week. I know he didn't do too much with him, only 35 receiving yards and 6 catches. Andy Dalton did not throw the ball downfield, so hopefully they can fix it up a little bit. This technically is a revenge spot here versus Cincinnati, so maybe he'll get the ball down the field a little bit more. But he did have a 27.5% target share in that last game. I know he didn't do too much with it, but I will take the volume in a decent matchup versus the Bengals for a decent cash game play here. Antonio Brown, already talked about the Bucs wide receivers. Cooper Kupp, $6,000. He exploded in week 1, had 9 targets, 7 catches, over 100 yards, a near 40% target share, and close to an 80% weighted opportunity share. Obviously, him and Robert Woods are going to be kind of divvied up for the entire season, but Matthew Stafford in that offense looked really good in week 1. Pretty tough matchup versus the Bears, too. It's going to get a little bit softer here versus the Colts. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett both have success there, so $6,000. I think Cooper Kupp is definitely a very safe play. I think you can play him in cash games. Jacoby Myers, $5,100. He quietly had a very busy day on Sunday. 9 targets, 6 catches, 44 yards with a 23.6% target share. Actually a pretty good spot versus the Jets too, as they were 20th versus wide receivers last year and 28th DVA versus the pass. So Mac Jones looked his way, and at $5,100, definitely think that makes him viable. Then if you're looking for the chalky punt option this week, we have Cedric Wilson at $3,100. And this is mainly just because Club is going to be out for this game and for many weeks now. He's only $3,100. This team loves to run 3 wide receiver sets, so Wilson will be on the field a lot. It's not out of the question that he pushes for 5+ targets here. The guy's actually pretty talented, I think, and he's actually shown flashes in the past. So at $3,100, and which should be a very high-scoring game. Scott should throw the ball probably around 50 times. I would take Cedric Wilson all day at that price point. He really makes some things work up top as well. And moving on to the tight end position, really nothing too exciting here, but we have Kyle Pitts up top at $5,200. And I know he kind of disappointed in his first outing, but Atlanta as a whole was absolutely awful. But he still had 7 targets in that game, which equated to around a 24.5% target share, and he had a 32% market share of the team's air yards. And I am assuming Atlanta is going to be trailing in. They're 12.5-point dogs on the road, so Kyle Pitts should probably push for double-digit targets here. Half of his routes came out of the slot here, so he's basically the wide receiver 2 in Atlanta, right behind Calvin Ridley. Hayden Hurst is mainly the tight end 1, so Pitts should be playing ball. A gifted athlete. At some point, he's going to pop here, so I like Kyle Pitts after maybe what some people would view as a down week for him in week 1. Dropping that old man Gronk here, $4,700. If you're using Tom Brady, I don't hate using the old man combo here that's been tearing up defenses for a decade now. He had 9 targets last week, 2 touchdowns, 17.3% target share. And Atlanta last season was absolutely awful versus tight ends, allowing the third most fantasy points per game to the position. So Gronk, even though it doesn't feel great rostering him, I think the price point's nice, the matchup is good, and obviously Tom Brady's going to look around him near the end zone. Then Noah Fant, $4,200. No Jerry Jeudy, so that's going to open up some targets in this offense. Noah Fant should be fine. He had 7 targets last week, over a 22% target share, 6 catches, 62 yards, just an overall very solid game. It's a pretty good matchup here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, who could not stop the Houston Texans offense this year, which is going to be one of the worst offenses in football. So good luck. I think Noah Fant should definitely have a very solid game at that price point. Tyler Higbee at $4,100 might be one of my favorite tight end plays on the entire slate. Oh, they're all very close to each other. Like, I don't really have a strong lean to any of these tight ends. I just think they're all fine for their price points. But Higbee, he was the clear tight end one in this offense. He had a handful of targets. Matthew Stafford looked really good. 6 targets, 5 catches, close to 70 yards on a 23% target share. And I love the matchup versus Indy, but at that price point, he should be just fine with Stafford under center. Then Jared Cook at $3,900, mainly just getting cheap exposure to this game. But he had 8 targets last week. A lot of people were more in on Parham. It looks like Jared Cook is going to be the guy you want to roster here. 5 catches, 56 yards. Obviously going to be a threat in the red zone. Like that price point below 4K if you just want cheap exposure to this game. And as for the defenses, I hate trying to talk about defenses because it's really hard to project these guys. I'd mainly just try to find either guys in good spots or home favorites, and that's pretty much what we did here. The Broncos are on the road, but they have a solid defense. They're facing Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence looked awful in his first start, and just Jacksonville looked terrible overall. They played the Texans, which projected to be the worst team in the NFL season, and they could not stop them whatsoever. Only a 20-point implied team total against them, 5.5-point favorites, don't hate it. The Browns defense, the top overall projected defense in the entire slate. I know they faced the Chiefs last week, so their numbers aren't going to look too pretty, but most defenses won't look good versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Cleveland has a lot of new pieces on defense this year, and they actually should be pretty good. So 12.5-point favorites at home with a 17.75 implied team total against them. Amped up after losing a close game versus the Chiefs. Definitely the best defense on the slate, in my opinion. The Steelers defense, I imagine, might be the highest owned because that price point's a little bit easier to fit than the Browns. Also, with everyone playing Najee Harris, they're actually a pretty good correlation play with Najee Harris, assuming the Steelers play with the lead, so I don't hate that. A 6.5-point favorites at home. The Bears defense, they're facing Cincinnati. I don't love it. Cincinnati does have some good offensive pieces, but they're still a decent defense. Things harder here for Joe Burrow, only 21.5 implied team total against them. And the Jets defense, I hate even recommending this, but if you're looking for a dirt cheap option, they're only $2,200. They're only 5.5-point dogs here. It's not terrible. It's not like they're double-digit dogs. 24.25 implied team total against them. We're playing at home. Mac Jones, I don't think he's going to absolutely light them up. It's not pretty, but if you're just looking for maybe a couple points for $2,200, I think the Jets do make some sense. With that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. You get access to a lot of extra content, so check it out. I think you will find it valuable. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks. It's just you versus the projections, and as of right now, if you're new signing over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be pretty much it. I will stop rambling, and the lineup building video and the core plays video will be out tomorrow.